Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Nick Whalen, Jeff Erickson here with you. Jeff, that was my first time seeing and hearing the new intro that we have. If you've been to rotowire.com recently, you've certainly noticed things look a little bit different over there. We got a new color scheme. We got a new logo. You can see it right there on your screen if you're watching along live with us on the RotoWire YouTube channel, which we highly encourage you to check out. And look, if you are doing that, if you're listening in audio form, that's fine too. But we should tell you, use the code YouTube15, YOUTUBE15, YouTube15. Put that in at rotowire.com, 15% off any of our subscription products. Jeff, we're going to be talking quarterbacks today. You and I, have spent many a day doing this on SiriusXM, on VSiN, but really excited to go deep with you over the next 45 minutes or so. We'll talk tiers. We'll talk guys we like, guys we don't like, our own personal rankings, our strategy at the position. So we'll dive into that in a moment. But first, CIRCA Million and CIRCA Survivor are back with a massive $21 million in guaranteed prizes. With CIRCA Million, you pick 5 games against the spread each week, 18 weeks of action with 126 ways to win. $1 million go to the winner, and there are $6 million guaranteed overall. CIRCA Survivor, pretty simple. 1 pick a week, no point spread, last the longest to win it all. At least $15 million guaranteed in CIRCA Survivor this year. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere, $21 million guaranteed between the two big contests over at CIRCA. Visit circasports.com for details. All right, Jeff, so let's start off with a little quarterback strategy, right? Well, we'll get into our rankings. We'll get into the nitty-gritty as we go along, but I'll just ask you very simply, do you tend to be an early quarterback guy?
I typically do not. And let's make the caveat that we're talking about single quarterback leagues. I think obviously everything changes in QB flex league, super flex leagues. Although even that, you and I employed a bit of a waiting strategy in the RotoWire Dynasty League, which is a super flex league, and it paid off handsomely for us both. But no, I often will wait. When I do reach on an early quarterback, I often regret it. For instance, even in best ball, Nick, last night, I did an underdog, a corgi draft, and I was testing to see if California still worked because of all the things that are going on here. But anyhow, I went early on Joe Burrow, and I kind of wish I didn't. I kind of wish that I part of me wishes that I just would have done what I usually do in redraft leagues, and that is the wait on the quarterbacks. More often than not, you're going to see me waiting, and not just waiting, but often extreme waiting on quarterbacks. And in single quarterback redraft leagues, I'll wait to the 10th round or later, sometimes even 10th or 11th round, and I'll draft 2 pretty quickly. And I find that, especially in this year's draft pool, I feel that's a pretty viable strategy.
No question. And, across all the various leagues that I end up doing each year, some voluntarily, some against my will, Jeff, I think I wait on quarterback more often than I go early quarterback. And part of it is, like you said, I feel like in the modern NFL right now, especially over these last couple of years, and I think it's even more so the case this year than last year, if you wait on quarterback, you're not settling for just this like ultra depressing option, right? It's like waiting on quarterback could mean that maybe you have 2 of, I don't know, Justin Herbert and Jordan Love, or Trevor Lawrence, or Michael Penix, or even Matthew Stafford. That's kind of the line that I draw. Matthew Stafford, who's like QB 22 right now in the NFFC. He's not somebody I want starting for me every week, but you could play the matchups. There are so many guys who go after those top 12. And the one thing I don't want to do, Jeff, is if we're talking about waiting on quarterback, I don't want that to mean I'm taking a quarterback in the 5th or the 6th or the 7th round. Like, I love Patrick Mahomes. I love Baker Mayfield. I love Bo Nix. I don't love the value of those players. I don't know if there's a huge difference between those 3 that I just mentioned and guys who often go 30, 40 picks later. And you look at somebody like Jared Goff, ADP of 99 right now in the NFFC. That's in the last month, or in the month of July, I should say. I mean, that's 30 picks later. That's almost 3 rounds later than Baker Mayfield.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I think there is very little separation there. We could be wrong. Baker Mayfield threw for 40 touchdowns last year. He could be closer to Burrow than the bottom tier, but we're on his 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 years. We're talking about maybe Mike Evans as a year that he finally starts to fade. Yeah. Who knows? Does he break that fabled 1,000-yard season streak? We'll see. I mean, it's possible. And like just look at like Jared Goff. Jared Goff going around pick 125. I'll be very comfortable with that. Detroit might be in shootouts all season long. And the point is, you name 3 guys, I'll name 3 others, and they're all like, let's define this. I think after like pick 120, okay, now you're talking in a 12-team league, the end of the 10th, beginning of the 11th. Yeah, that's my vibe. That's where I like to go more. And I can't believe I said that phrase. That's my vibe. I'll not do that ever again.
You've been pulling out phrases all over the place today, Jeff. I think we had a rapscallion drop on Beaston earlier today. You're running hot right now. No, I'm with you, man. There are so many appealing names in that range. And I think the way that you and I have talked about it over the last few weeks is, there's a group of 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks, starting with Goff, who's QB 12 at the NFFC, and going all the way for me to like Michael Penix at QB 21. Now that there are some quarterbacks who I like more than others in that group, but you could basically tell me that they would finish in any order. And a few of them, jump up into that QB 6 to QB 10 range. And none of that would seem all that improbable to me, So the point that we're trying to make is if you're going to wait, I think wait until you get to a point where you don't feel like you're leaving value on the board at other positions.
Exactly right. And that's it. I don't mind going early. I don't mind getting one of the elites either. And especially, say for instance, you're in a league where everybody waits on it there, and you're getting, Daniels in the 5th round or Hurts in the 6th round or something like that. Then jump all over it. I think that's fine. I even, depending on your scoring system and what that does with Burrow also changes things. If you're in the NFFC, it's a little different where you get 6 points for a passing touchdown. Then I think Burrow's firmly in that first tier. I was asked a tiers question earlier today there on a radio hit. And I think it's a 5 quarterback first tier with Burrow. If you're in a 3 points for passing touchdown or like a point per 25 or 30 passing yards, maybe that changes the answer and it's a 4-person tier. Fine. But Lamar, Josh Allen, Daniels, Hurts, and Burrow are it there. I'd actually go Burrow over Hurts in the NFFC and maybe over Daniels too.
Yeah, I think that's fair if we're talking 6 points per passing touchdown. So the kind of dead zone for me, Jeff, like the guys who I like but don't love and very, very rarely end up taking unless they fall, ends up being Mahomes, Mayfield, Nix, Kyler Murray. And of that group, I certainly like Kyler Murray the least. He tends to go the latest of that group. The one you could sell me on most, I think, is Patrick Mahomes because we've seen it. Now, it's been a few years since we've seen it, but I have more optimism about the Chiefs getting that offense turned around, looking more like the 2022 Chiefs this season than I have over the last couple of years.
Sure. I have Mahomes at the top of the dead zone tier, and I have Murray not in that tier. I have him in the next tier below, which means, but it's funny, in the Madison draft that we did at the beginning of June, I actually grabbed Murray because he fell to the middle of that 3rd tier. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine. I'll take Murray and it's like one of those things where you get 2 of them, but it's a little different there. But no, I agree with you. I think, you get a fully healthy and, productive Rashee Rice, full season of Hollywood Brown or something approaching that, year 2 of Xavier Worthy. Okay. You've got me interested there. I'm worried about the left tackle situation there. I think that's still an issue. And we know when Mahomes doesn't have the time to throw, the comfort of throwing, he's a different quarterback a little bit. And that's what happened at an extreme portion in the Super Bowl. But you know what? I get you on that one there. But the problem is I don't want to draft him and still where he's going, even acknowledging that.
One guy who's starting to grow on me, Jeff, and I'm curious where he comes in your personal rankings. I was kind of doing a reassessment of my list earlier today, and I stuck him in at number 10, Justin Fields. If Justin Fields could just remain the starter in New York, which I think he can, there's not an obvious replacement behind him. I guess if you want to say that's Tyrod Taylor, sure. But are we really going down this road again with Tyrod Taylor, who's been in this spot for like a decade at this point? Like, I think we know who he is. It would take a special set of circumstances where the Jets are winning games, but they don't feel good about Justin Fields and they go to, maybe a quote unquote safer option in Tyrod. But I think this is his job to lose firmly. And all the reporting around him has been positive. I know we've been through this with Justin Fields himself in other spots, but I like the weapons around him. We'll see about the coaching. Yeah, I mean, that's a giant question mark, as always, with the New York Jets, who have a new staff in place, a defensive-minded head coach in Aaron Glenn. But I'm finding it difficult, Jeff, to look at that group of quarterbacks that we're talking about and not give Justin Fields a significant bump, because the one thing that he does that all these other quarterbacks we mentioned, whether it's Goff or Justin Herbert or CJ Stroud or Brock Purdy, it's the rushing production. You look at those 6 games he started at the beginning of last year for the Steelers, QB6 through the first 6 weeks of the season.
I think there's 2 ways to address two ways where Justin Fields probably doesn't merit that. One is the NFFC, and 2 is maybe in super flex leagues, where I think volatility hurts you a lot more. When you need those 2 quarterbacks every single week, the fact that, and there's no replacement on the waiver wire, you can't pick up somebody. I think you have to discount Fields in those type of leagues where it's 6 points for a passing touchdown. So thus the rushing ability is diminished a little bit there, not completely taken away, but it is diminished a little bit. I think in those situations, I think you have to discount him a little bit, but I agree with you. Otherwise, I have him a little lower than you, but I'm in an NFFC mindset a lot of times, even though it's so funny. In the NFBC for baseball, the format, it closer mirrors how everybody else plays. The 6 points for a passing touchdown is something that's almost none of my other leagues play in. Right. So I have to kind of keep that in mind, that when I'm doing my other drafts, just to keep that there. But I think in those 2 formats, you discount Fields. Otherwise, I get your point. I would say that the skill position backing behind him is pretty poor. You have Garrett Wilson, you have the running backs. You have a tight end that you drafted in the 2nd round, but I look at that wide receiver room, for instance, there. It's right there with the Steelers, ironically enough, as one of the worst in football.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. The lack of depth at receiver is a problem. I would I would argue he's never had a talent the level of Garrett Wilson. I think the question is Justin Fields the type of quarterback that could really take advantage of that? Can he zero in on somebody like Garrett Wilson? That is a fair question, but I don't know. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that he can at least, push for top 10 value if he hangs on to that job. What do we do with CJ Stroud, Jeff? Like he's the guy who I think we both identified was going a little bit too high last year. It's now swung back the other way for me. I mean, he is going as the QB 17 in the month of July at the NFFC. And that's the type of format you would think that would benefit CJ Stroud. Not a whole lot of questions for me about the surrounding talent at wide receiver. Obviously Stephon Diggs out, Tank Dell injured, we think, for most of the season, but they go out, they add to that receiving core in the draft. You obviously have Nico Collins, who took another big step forward last season. CJ Stroud is now somebody that went from completely undraftable to me a year ago to somebody that I am more than happy to take with pick like 115.
We talk about starting pitching, having the glob. Quarterbacks are the glob, and he's, those 3rd-tier quarterbacks are in the glob, and he's certainly part of it. I see the case for and against Stroud. 4 is obviously they added a lot of talent. I think there's some unproven aspect to that talent, both in terms of the rookies that they drafted from Iowa State, also Christian Kirk, and just so much that, is he going to be healthy? What version of Christian Kirk are we really going to get here? And then on top of that, it's the blocking. It's the line. The line was a big problem last year. Is that fixed? I'm not sure it is. They traded away their left tackle, Laramie Tunsil. I think that was huge, but maybe he didn't fit with this team. Maybe he was part of the problem. They fired their offensive coordinator, who sets a lot of the blocking schemes. So maybe that was it. Like, how much trust do we really have that Cam Robinson? Cam Robinson. You have experience with Cam Robinson. How much trust do we have that he's going to fix their left side pass blocking rows? Laken Tomlinson's now with the team. They spent some draft capital, obviously, on the offensive line. They took Asuri in the 2nd round. So how quickly is he starting? That's another thing. So I think there's some early on. I have some question marks. I have some concerns. But again, they play in, no offense, the AFC South. I think that's a good place. Houston's already ticketed for a division crown, including by you. That they should be the favorite there. So they should be a winning team. But it's just, how are they going to? They have a killer defense too. They don't need to get in shootouts. This is kind of like different than his rookie year. There may not be that many shootouts on this team.
That's true. That's true. The offensive line of all the things you brought up is still my biggest concern.
Yeah.
I would like to believe that it's one of those it can't be any worse than last year situations, but when your solution is to then trade away the only good lineman that you have, and like you said, replace him with Cam Robinson, who's become like the Andrew Wiggins of the NFL, where it's like, well, I guess he's like replacement level. Every team will take a chance and see if they could be the team to get the most out of him. It's worrisome. That is worrisome to me, but I still respect the talent. I'm a Christian Kirk guy. If he does stay healthy, I think that's a nice kind of veteran acquisition to get you at least through part of the season. While you're still bringing along Jaden Higgins, you're bringing along Jalen Noel, but I think the level of investment in that passing game, going receiver, in the middle rounds of the draft to essentially say, look, we're not bringing back Stephon Diggs. We know Tank Dell is not going to be here next year. We don't want this thing to drop off a cliff like it did last season, because I think the lack of receiver depth with Diggs going down, with Collins missing time, that was a big part of the reason that CJ Stroud had the season that he did.
Yep. Trevor Lawrence or CJ Stroud? Who do you have?
CJ Stroud. Reluctantly, CJ Stroud. Yeah, it's close. It's close. It's still CJ Stroud for me. We got a good question in the chat here. Not really a question, just a statement, but a good jumping off point from Adam. He says, the only QB secret you should know is draft Brock Purdy. No better value right now. I had dropped Brock Purdy at number 9 on my quarterback list, just ahead of Justin Fields.
Yeah, I can see it. I like Purdy. I think, although I gotta say, in the case of Purdy, isn't a lot of it is a trust in those wide receivers. I mean, I think that's the tricky part there. How are they going to do in that situation there? I think that's going to be a real concern. I for some reason, I see what happened there. I have Purdy I have him pretty high, I think, on my my list of guys that I'd like here. I'm comparing him. Sorry, he's somehow listed in my wide receivers. That's why I'm kind of I have him he's almost in a tier of his own. He's like 25 spots behind Mahomes, Mayfield, and Knicks. But ahead of Goff, Murray, Prescott. So he's my QB9 as well. So we're in agreement here.
Yeah, and that's roughly in line with ADP as of right now. Looking at the NFFC again for the month of July, and he is going about pick 105. The other guy that I'm really talking myself into, Jeff, and he's now risen to the point where he's going inside the top 100 is Dak Prescott.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see it there. Dak gets his second receiver there. That's a pretty big thing to go ahead and get there for the Cowboys to go out and trade for Pickens. We'll see how well they mesh. I mean, Pickens, you brought it up earlier on the XM show on Tuesday morning, which was brought up by, and we're relaying a comment by Robert Mays in the Athletic podcast. Big fan of those guys. He and Derek Klassen do awesome work. But Pickens could either go crazy, have a 3-year, $90 million deal this offseason, this next upcoming offseason, or it could be on a prove it contract next year. It could go either way, and it wouldn't be too hard to envision either way.
No, for sure. For sure. I mean, he is in a lot of ways, I think, the ultimate boomer bust player, the ultimate boomer bust type of personality. You could see this going really well. You could also see it going really poorly. To kind of piggyback off of Robert's point is like, I don't see there being like a middle ground where it's just like, all right, well, the Cowboys were okay. George Pickens put up like 900 yards. It was just a ho-hum year. Like, I think this is either going to hit or it's going to be really bad. And I tend to think it's going to hit. I think we can talk about George Pickens never having a CeeDee Lamb type next to him. I don't know if CeeDee Lamb has ever really had talent the caliber of George Pickens opposite him either. They've cycled in so many other options and nobody's really stuck. There's been injuries outside of CeeDee Lamb. Lamb himself has been banged up, but I'm really high on what this Cowboys offense could be with a healthy Dak Prescott. We didn't see that for most of last season. And I think you kind of oftentimes remember what you last saw. And that was a just really terrible Cowboys team that couldn't run the ball whatsoever. You forget that 2 years ago, Dak Prescott threw for over 4,500 yards, 36 touchdowns, finished second in MVP voting. The big caveat here is, one, the offensive line is not what it used to be in Dallas. Right. It's certainly not a strength at this point. It's not Houston bad, but it's not good. And two, you have a new offensive coordinator, a rookie offensive coordinator, and a rookie head coach as well. This is not the Mike McCarthy Cowboys. No, it is not. And that's the thing. It's certainly not offensive coordinator wise, especially you're not getting that there. You're not going to be doing the air raid sort of offense there under Schottenheimer. That is for sure. All right, so looking elsewhere at the quarterback position, Jeff, we talked about some of our favorite later round targets. We've talked about that middle zone. I want to hit some of these lower tier guys who we didn't really mention. You were talking about that big group. Where do you come in on someone like Michael Penix, who, if you're playing in a shallower league, you might not even have to draft him. 2 quarterback league, that's going to be a completely different story. But, when you're looking at guys who are widely available, late in drafts, Michael Penix, QB 21 right now, somebody who is still being taken in most NFFCs, but he's like the last quarterback who's been drafted in each of the 15 drafts that have gone off in July. He's somebody to me that I think we could be talking about in a completely different light this time next year.
Yeah, for sure. I think you want to talk about a team who has weapons to support him. You've got Drake London, who you love. You've got, Bijan Robinson, obviously, who catches a ton of passes. You have a generational tight end in Kyle Pitts. You've got a good, solid second wide receiver as well. This is a team that should be able to support Penix. And we saw some signs there with Penix. We certainly saw what we'd like there if you have Drake London, that London was going to get very frequently targeted. Now maybe teams are going to change their looks that what Penix sees this year, and force them to kind of beat him with somebody else. We'll see about that. But man, I like force feeding London the ball. That's for sure.
Yeah, I just like the direction that this Atlanta team is heading, and I think we almost got a bad read on them for most of last season just because of the limitations of Kirk Cousins, which I think it took a while to realize just how bad it was, right? Like they won a couple of games early on. They had that crazy win against the Eagles, and you're thinking, okay, maybe this team has, a little bit more upside. And by the time we got to midseason, it was just clear that, the passing game had to be so limited because of Kirk Cousins' physical limitations. I don't want to build everything off of 2 games at the end of the season that were pretty meaningless. Drake London had 31, 32 targets in those 2 games. I don't think we can just take that and say, all right, that's how it's going to be every week in 2025. But I think this is going to be a much more dynamic offense. It's going to be a much more confident offense. It's an offense that basically had to go into a shell when they had Kirk Cousins and play not to lose, right? And not only do we see more Drake London involvement, we saw the Falcons kind of unleash Bijan Robinson over the second half of last season. And I think just having competent quarterback play in the way that I think Penix will bring this season, I think that upgrades everybody in that offense.
Yeah. I think one thing that keeps him a little lower for me than versus some other quarterbacks out there is you're not going to get a whole lot of running. Like Drake May, for instance, is going to scramble a decent amount. Caleb Williams obviously is going to scramble a decent amount. You mentioned Justin Fields. Herbert will run a little bit more. Yeah. So that pushes him down below some of those other guys in that tier. I think Trevor Lawrence runs a little bit more. I'd take Lawrence over him too.
I hope, man. I hope. Do you want to just have the Trevor Lawrence discussion here? Yeah, I feel like we're beating around the bush. This has to be the year. This absolutely has to be the year for Trevor Lawrence. I think we're going to know one way or the other by the end of this season. Is Trevor Lawrence going to be a very good quarterback? Is he going to be just the guy that he's been so far? Or is there even a bigger cliff that could be coming here? I think we're going to get our answer. The Jaguars have tried multiple coaches. They've tried multiple offensive coordinators. They've cycled in skill position talent. I don't know that this roster is loaded. I feel like some people, the way they talk about the Jags are like, oh man, they're going to be, a 12-win team. Let's pump the brakes on that a little bit. We'll
see. They added Diami Brown. Come on.
Yeah, well, as much as I love Diami Brown, we'll see. Part of this, of course, hinges on Travis Hunter, but you have a true number 1 in Brian Thomas. That I will say for sure. I'm all in on Brian Thomas, who did a lot of his work last year with Mac Jones. To me, there might be a difference between Trevor Lawrence having a really good season and the Jaguars. I don't know. They could win the AFC South. They could make the playoffs. That wouldn't be that crazy. I would still be surprised if Trevor Lawrence is pushing for top 8, top 9 quarterback value in fantasy. The rushing has been so hit or miss. He's taken some huge hits. He's had some injuries. I don't know how much they necessarily want to be exposing him, even if that should be a part of his game. He's never been a guy that's had this extreme touchdown potential through the air. To me, there's a difference between a successful season for the Jaguars and Lawrence and a huge fantasy season for Trevor Lawrence, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And the thing is, what I want to see is, does the decision-making improve? Does he,
the little things,
big things, 3rd and 8, you throw a ball away or make the wrong read, or just the killer interceptions. Those are the things. I mean, those are not little things. Those are big things, Yeah. And if it's not going to happen now, it's never going to happen. That's the thing about him. I mean, he's been in the league long enough that this has got to stop.
Yes.
This is year 5. I know he got hurt last year. I want to actually see if he does a better job of, identifying that Brian Thomas Jr. is his meal ticket. Does he force feed him? Does he force feed Hunter, a little bit more instead of like pulling it down, giving up on a play too soon? I don't know. I mean, these are the things I need to see from. I think he can still do it. I hate that he's had whack a coordinator. He never seems to have it one voice. But let's hope that Liam Cohen is the whisperer, and that he gets him going on the right path.
He did it in Tampa Bay. I think he can do it in Jacksonville. My mental health, my sanity in a lot of ways over the next 6 months heavily hinges on whether that is the case. But to close the book on Lawrence, Jeff, everything you said is totally accurate, right? I think it's easy to just look at the raw touchdown numbers, the yardage numbers. It really is the little details when you watch it, right? Like the truly good to great quarterbacks, and maybe it's just great quarterbacks in the NFL. If you're down 3 with 2.5 minutes left, you're getting the ball back. There's a fair catch. And if your team is going up against that quarterback, are you scared that they're going to drive down, at least get into field goal range, if not finish that drive with a touchdown? Look, I'm a Jaguars fan. I'm never like, oh, can't wait for Trevor Lawrence to get the ball, right? I've never felt that way. Like that's the level that I think you have to get to. And I don't even know if that's a statistical benchmark to clear. It's more of a mentality type of thing. And there's never been this killer instinct, this sense of ultimate confidence, when Trevor Lawrence is leading that team.
Not even the year that they made it all the way against the Chiefs in the playoffs, where they had the huge comeback against the Chargers.
Yeah, didn't he throw like 3 picks in the first half and they were down like 22-3 or something? Yeah, he put them in that hole, man.
Yeah, the Cowboys game that I think was that same year where he had a crazy comeback in that game.
Yep.
Although didn't they get like a pick 6 in their favor?
Yeah, I think
in that
they
game?
had at least one defensive touchdown. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that was a fun game too. No, I get you. I get you on that one there. You're not fully confident about him. And last year the last 2 years have kind of wiped out any of that confidence you may have had. Yeah. That's the real problem too.
All right, we'll talk more quarterbacks in a moment. First, we have a message from our friends at FanTrax. If there's something you wish your fantasy league had, or features that are missing from your current leagues, bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings, well, look no further because we have you covered with our friends at FanTrax. FanTrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, or best ball leagues. FanTrax even offers college football fantasy leagues as well. Create or join a fantasy commissioner league, invite your friends, and dominate your draft this season. FanTrax is the top dynasty football platform in the industry, and FanTrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. You can sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire. Do it right now. You can enter for your chance to win a signed Jamar Chase jersey. Simply create a new league or bring in your existing league for more chances to win. Go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. FanTrax, the home of fantasy sports. We're also brought to you by the NFFC. We've been talking about it throughout this show. The NFFC RotoWire Fantasy Football Online Championship is now live. You can play fantasy against your favorite RotoWire experts on NFFC this season. Jeff Erickson, right there. Nick Whalen, me. A whole lot more of us over at RotoWire will be competing in the RotoWire NFFC Online Championship for a shot at $250,000. Sign up for a draft today at rotowire.com/high stakes. That's rotowire.com/high stakes. All right, I want to go through a few more names with you, Jeff. Somebody we have not talked about yet, and I think to me he falls below the dead zone, but he's kind of in like this in between tier where he's not one of these guys where if I'm waiting on quarterback, I'm looking to pick in like the 100 to 120 range. He goes a little bit ahead of that on average. What are we doing with Caleb Williams?
Good question. Hanging on for dear life in dynasty leagues, first of all. After that, it's a real test to like, okay, how much is Ben Johnson going to change him? How much is he going to change? The nagging thing that holds me back from really embracing like the Caleb Williams breakout is his decision-making against the pass rush, his pocket awareness, his running into sacks, that sort of thing. Like, how does he handle adversity? Because he handled it really poorly last year. And adversity comes for everyone at some point in time. It's like, I think a lot of times it's what you do after things go sideways. Yeah. How does he react to that? How can he recover from that? that's the thing I want to see. And that's what holds me back from like pushing him comfortably above these guys. Like I'll probably go the stupid safe route and go with Jared Goff, even though I understand Caleb Williams could be a league winner.
Yeah.
He could be a guy that is, we always talk about this when we're waiting on quarterbacks. Who could be that guy? Who could be the next, the next Lamar, there was a stretch there where year 2 quarterbacks really had that big impact. And we're looking at guys that are mobile. Williams certainly is that. I could see that happening. I could see this all happening, Nick. And yet I haven't hit that button yet to click on him just yet in a redraft league.
I haven't either. And it's not necessarily an anti Caleb Williams thing. I guess to me, there's a difference between mobility and being like a true running quarterback, right? Like Caleb Williams is not just going to become Jaden Daniels or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, right? It's like there is still to me a cap as far as that rushing upside goes. I think we need to see significantly more development as a passer. Like you said, the decision making, really everything we just talked about with Trevor Lawrence. And of course, it's a similar situation too, right? If we feel great about Liam Cohen being the Trevor Lawrence whisperer, I think you have to feel good about Ben Johnson doing the same thing in Chicago. This is one, Jeff, where I do look at last season and say, this probably was the worst case scenario. I don't think it could be worse than that. And
can always be worse, Nick. Just you got to relearn this lesson.
Is he going to take more than 68 sacks? I don't know if he is. It was clearly
he takes a worse sack and gets hurt. There you go. It's worse.
Well, we knew the Bears were going to be bad, right? I think we knew this was going sideways early in the season. I don't think we knew just how bad it was until after they fired Eberflus and we got all the postmortem, and that to me, it's not an excuse, but it's at least something to point to as to why these struggles, were so prevalent throughout that rookie year. So I saw enough from Caleb Williams to think that this could be a good second year, a big second year jump for him. Is it enough for me to burn a top 100 pick on him? Do I think there will be that much of a difference between Caleb Williams and Jared Goff, Caleb Williams and Brock Purdy, Caleb Williams and Jordan Love to justify that? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, and you're right that he's almost in that, like I put Purdy in that mini tier of his own. Williams is really at the top of the glob. And I can see it. I think if he gets to you at 120, you take him. But if not, don't go out of your way to get him. I think that's kind of been my approach with him.
Yeah.
I certainly I would take him straight up over Bo Nix because I have some other concerns about Bo Nix. I definitely think Nix belongs in that next tier below. I think Bo Nix has a better offensive line. I don't know what happens when he does get under pressure. I don't know what happens when you need Bo Nix to win a game for you at the end of the game. Yeah. I think he's like the most likely to regress of all the second year quarterbacks because I think too many things went perfectly in the second half for him. The first half, we saw a really awful version of Bo Nix, and I don't think he belongs in that second tier. So I would take Caleb Williams over Bo Nix, but I wouldn't go out of my way to do it. I would not. I would probably take Purdy over Nix as well.
Purdy over Nix, I could see. I don't know if I'm taking Caleb over Bo Nix, and I think everything you said is reasonable. There were some splashy games against some bad teams that are carrying a lot of the water when you look at the overall numbers, right? I mean, 3 touchdowns against Carolina, 4 against Atlanta, 4 in Week 18 against Kansas City when they were playing no starters. So
like third string, yeah,
right. There is certainly merit to what you're saying. You feel significantly better about Caleb Williams making a year 2 leap than you do Bo Nix even just sustaining what he did last season, because Bo Nix was like 4.5 fantasy points per game ahead of Caleb Williams last year.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I'm underselling what Nix did. I just like you. I think there is just I can't get out of my head the first half of the season. I can't get out of my head when things were in a tough spot there. So I know that they've improved around him though too. I get that. Yeah. Maybe this is a hot take gone bad. Maybe I'll be featured on some sort of gimmick account there but I don't know. I don't really. This is something with Nix that I don't really feel super great about that. There had some sort of he had a surgical procedure in the offseason as well. Nix did, but kind of undisclosed about that.
If he wasn't tethered to Sean Payton, I think I would agree with you.
Yeah. You're really counting on like Mims or Vele, I think, to making a leap. But then I guess they added Ingram.
Yeah, Evan Ingram matters.
Yeah, Ingram matters. Can Ingram stay healthy? I'm curious, we'll get into running backs next week, but Harvey versus Dobbins is interesting, and who gets up getting more snaps, I think, kind of indicates a little bit too. Also, how they plan to play.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, looking beyond Cortland Sutton, there aren't names in this wide receiver core. They made it work last year. Again, I think the Sean Payton factor looms large here, but making a point to go out and get Evan Ingram, I think he's going to be a huge impact piece for them. They don't necessarily have that high end number 2 receiver. I think the hope is that Evan Ingram essentially functions as that at the tight end position. I don't know that a 40 touchdown season is necessarily coming for Bo Nix, but as some in the chat are indicating. But look, I mean, I think if you look at the first half of last season, I don't think you can really hold that against him. A guy who I thought was a little bit overdrafted, wasn't necessarily ready, clearly wasn't ready to begin the year. I think you have to respect the progression that he made and the way that I thought they made him more comfortable, right? Like one thing that stuck out to me as the season went along is like they're running these design rollouts. Like he's catching the ball in shotgun and he's just bolting out of the pocket right away because I think they recognize that that's where he's more comfortable.
Yeah. So, and again, Peyton is a plus factor there. You're absolutely right about that. One other thing I'll say is I think they run better and more effectively this year, which means they're relying less on Nix. I think they've upgraded significantly at running back. And I also think that the defense, which was already pretty darn good last year, got even better this offseason. So maybe that means more possessions, but maybe it also means less shootouts. And like, for instance, that Bengals game, that was a back and forth game, and that kind of helped pad some stats a little bit there, especially when you get to face the Bengals secondary. That's a good way to pad your stats too. But here's Marvin Mims wide open with the game on the line. Oh, oops. Funny how that worked. But I think that's another thing you got to kind of watch a little bit there too, is that the pace of these games might be a little slower this year.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. At this juncture, it's hard for me to, just look at a schedule and assume, certain games are going to go certain ways. Like so much is going to change week to week when we get into the season. But I still have Bo Nix as a top 10 guy for me. Yeah. I got him at number 8 on my list, just ahead of Brock Purdy, just ahead of Justin Fields. All right, I want to throw a couple more names your way, Jeff. And one of those is JJ McCarthy in Minnesota. If you waited on quarterback, you probably even have to draft him in a lot of leagues. But if you ended up with Sam Darnold, you ended up doing just fine, about 19 fantasy points per game, had 20 plus in 3 of his first 4 games. It was clear pretty early on that this was going to work out, even though we kept asking, can he do this over and over again? And he did until we got to week 17. Your level of faith in Kevin O'Connell doing the same thing now with JJ McCarthy, who I will remind you has yet to take a regular season snap.
I mean, it is a little bit of a black box here, especially because McCarthy was a leader and did a lot more in his senior year at Michigan, but he wasn't really asked to air it out either. So but he is stepping into the ultimate supporting cast, right? Pretty good offensive line, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and most importantly, Kevin O'Connell. I think he's an ideal QB too. If you're doing in a 1 QB league, I think he's an ideal backup to add. He might have I think there's a huge upside. There's also a pretty low floor. I wouldn't want to start him in week 1. I think the Vikings schedule is a little tougher this year too. So I think that's another thing you kind of have to look at that might work against him a little bit. But I do think though, at the same time, there's such a good setup there. It wouldn't take much for it to go right.
I think that's a good way to put it. I still would take Stroud. I would take Love. I would take Herbert. I would take Trevor Lawrence over JJ McCarthy, sight unseen. I could certainly eat those words by week 3 of the season. Vikings, by the way, open up at the Bears, home for the Falcons, and then home against the Cincinnati Bengals, first 3 games of the season. There's just a little too much risk for me here. I was not a huge McCarthy guy coming out of the draft. I could tell you, being here in the state of Wisconsin, there were plenty of people that were excited when the Vikings took him, which just some random people's opinion. But a lot of my friends were like, great, send that guy to the Vikings. We don't think he's going to be any good. I think a lot of the momentum that he had built up around, August of last year, he showed some big time flashes in the 1 preseason game. I just want to pump the brakes a little bit. And look, We're talking about the QB 19, the QB 20 right now. It's not a guy who's necessarily going to make or break your draft. You're not drafting him to be your starter in fantasy. But like you said, if you if you go early quarterback, if you double up on later round quarterbacks, if he's your second guy, that's totally fine with me. I just think there are some safer options with comparable, if not higher ceilings in that same range.
I think the ceiling's pretty high. I just think the floor is a lot lower. That's
right.
That's my schedule's also tough. I mean, they got the back-to-back overseas games.
Yeah,
I think that's a little tricky. They get the AFC North. You get the Browns, but you also get the Ravens, Bengals and Steelers. Of course, getting the Bengals in Minnesota, by the way, that might be a shootout, and that's in week 3. They got the early bye. I'd prefer a late bye, but after back-to-back overseas games, I get it that you kind of have to have an early bye. With that, they do get the Eagles after that bye. That's kind of tough too. Not just kind of tough; it's very tough. It's incredibly hard. But at least I think it's a harder schedule than last year, which I think was a pretty easy schedule. But it's still a pretty, it's attainable here. Playoff schedule wise, if you're looking at weeks 15, 16, 17, Commanders at the Cowboys at the Giants, it could be okay. Could be scary that, the Giants actually have a decent defense if they're still have anything to play for in cold weather. That could be an issue. McCarthy's used to cold weather, but obviously Minnesota plays their home games in a dome.
Yeah, Minnesota's been a tough team to evaluate, right? As Adam points out here, they won 14 games with Sam Darnold. I feel like the last, 4 seasons have just kind of alternated underachieving, overachieving. And I don't know which way this is going to go. I mean, the supporting cast around him, like you said, is about as good as you could ask for a quarterback who is essentially a rookie. I think Justin Jefferson alone provides you with the type of floor that very few receivers around the NFL do. I love Jordan Addison. I love TJ Hawkinson. I really like the Jordan Mason addition, by the way, for Minnesota. Giving them some Aaron Jones insurance. I would not be surprised if he ends up taking over, a lot more of that workload even early in the season than a lot of people expect. But it's hard for me to just sit here and talk definitively about a guy we've never seen throw an NFL regular season pass. So if there was ever a situation for this to work where he hits the ground running and by week 4 we feel really good about him, I think it would be in Minnesota paired up with KOC. All right, we'll finish with one more name, Jeff, and he has almost the exact same ADP in the month of July as JJ McCarthy. Jordan Love going around pick 121, your QB 18. We could quibble about whether Jordan Love was ever fully healthy last season. We saw 2 very different versions of the Packers offense, first half compared to the second half of the season. The schedule, of course, was a big part of that. But I think if you're looking for, that upside play, that guy who could be the QB6, QB7 this season, and you're getting him as the QB 18, I think Jordan Love has to be on that list of possibilities.
Sure, absolutely. I think he was really harmed by his wide receiver play last year. They attempted to address that, obviously, by drafting Matthew Golden, spending a 3rd-round pick on a receiver as well. Some of the receivers that were in the mix last year might not be as big a part of a mix this year. So that's kind of interesting to see. That I think that might have dictated some of the play calling. Like, okay, we got Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson out there a lot, and they're both dropping balls. Aside from like that Bears game where Watson changed that game in Chicago, but all on the balance was more hurtful than helpful. Wicks was just a straight up drop machine. So we'll see how this plays in terms of Golden number of targets he gets. The other issue I have is just volume. This is an offense that likes to run the ball a lot. They like to limit the attempts. They're going to run Josh Jacobs. They'll probably get more out of Marshawn Lloyd this year than they got in previous years, or not previous years, other than last year when Lloyd barely saw the field. I think that this is still going to be part of the way they operate. But I think he also way underachieved what he could have done last year. I think he's almost bound to have a better year this year.
I tend to agree with you. I think, again, you look at the first half versus the second half, 2 completely different versions of the Packers offense. I think the first half was closer to what we saw at the end of 2023, where you're willing to take the good with the bad when it comes to Jordan Love. And I think that's something that Green Bay needs to re-embrace. I think if you kind of piece through some of Jordan Love's quotes, especially late last season, a lot of the implication was like, I'm being told to not let it loose in the ways that I was in 2023. And, sometimes that's going to lead to 3 interceptions in the first half against Minnesota, but that's just the type of quarterback that he is right now. I think eventually you hope to coach that out of him, but we just saw such a limited version of this offense, ball control. They're pounding Josh Jacobs 25 times a game. I mean, Jordan Love was throwing the ball almost 35 times per game over the first half of the season, first 7 games. The rest of the year, 23 pass attempts per game. I don't care what quarterback you are. If you're only throwing it 23 times per game, and if half of those it felt like were just these little out routes to Dontavian Wicks or these fake jet sweeps to Jayden Reed, it's just not going to be productive from a fantasy perspective. And it obviously tracks that Jayden Reed was on track for a top 10 wide receiver season over those first 7 games, completely fell off the map over the second half. So I think there's a balance here. Like I don't think we see the Josh Jacobs just, pound it every single time, you're carrying us through every game offense, because that worked against Miami. It worked against San Francisco with a backup quarterback. It worked against the Spencer Rattler Saints on Monday night. They would then you run into Minnesota, you run into Detroit, you got to go score for score. You got to play from behind. And it just felt like the Packers were not equipped to do that because of how limited that passing game was.
Yeah. And so was that born out of necessity because of the receiving core, or was it born out of preference? I think that's the bigger question. And what do you do to react? I mean, let's face it. I mean, this has usually been a very efficient offense over the years with this regime. I think they probably react. Let's also remember that, Love got hurt in week 1 on that terrible turf in Brazil at the very end of the game. And I think that probably had a hangover over the rest of the season.
Yeah, no question. I think it did. And, I think he maybe came back too early. There was I think it was the Jags game later in the season where he got knocked out of it. Malik Willis comes back in. I don't know that he was ever fully healthy. I think there was a confidence issue both for him and the coaching staff. I think the way that LaFleur was even calling those games. So a balance has to be struck here. I don't think you go back to the ultra aggressive 35 to 40 attempts and marginalize Josh Jacobs, but I don't think you can swing too far the other way either. But we'll see, man. I'm optimistic. If I like Jordan Love, that means I like Jayden Reed. I'm a little bit lower on Matthew Golden. We'll see what he can provide right away. I think they hope he just fills the Christian Watson role immediately, because I don't think we see Christian Watson until maybe the very end of the season. And that could even be a little bit of wish casting. You worry about Romeo Doubs staying on the field at this point. I will say we'll get to tight ends over the next couple of weeks here, but Tucker Kraft as a late round tight end, I am in.
All right. I'm with you on that. And I like Jacobs. I think Jacobs is awesome.
He is awesome.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that discussion on running backs next week about, because I actually think you're getting him at a little bit of a discount. So happy to take that discount in some places.
All right, we'll wrap it up there. We want to thank all 3 of our great sponsors, CIRCA, FanTrax, and the NFFC. Again, make sure you use that code YouTube15. Head over to RotoWire.com, 15% off any of our subscription products. You can check out the new app. That's now live in the App Store. And Jeff will be doing this every Tuesday, taking you all the way through the NFL season. You can hear us on SiriusXM. You can catch us in the afternoons on VSiN as well. We'll talk to you next week doing running backs next time we chat.
All right. Sounds great.